Hello everyone, welcome to a joint PSA committee presentation with PSA Cybersecurity Committee and Project Management Committee. Our representatives from the Cybersecurity Committee include Andrew Lanning, co-founder of Integrated Security Technologies, and Scott Schmidt, Vice President of Technology with Aronson Security Group. The representatives from the Project Management Committee include Rex Allen, Operations Manager for Securadyne Systems, and Robert Flynn, Senior Vice President of Operations for Aronson Security Group. Let's get the discussion going, gentlemen.
In October 2016, the PSA Project Management Committee posted on the PSA website the project manager's role in providing today's security solutions that are cyber ready. I want to get the cyber group's input on some of the statements that were made in the document. The first question that I have for the group is, do you agree with the first statement I make that states most electronic security system products have vulnerabilities?
I'll jump on that. Definitely, the vulnerabilities are native to the way network devices talk, right? So, we've got IP communications, which are, everybody gets an IP address. I think people are familiar with this. They know that their browser goes to 192.168.1.1, for example, maybe when they're trying to bring a default to device, on so that they can configure it. So I think people know what an IP address is, and I think what they may not be aware of is that IP address has about 65,000 something ports on it that run various services like SMTP for mail, which is simple mail transfer protocol, and FTP, file transfer protocol. And so all these services run on different ports, and a lot of those ports are open by default. Specifically, HTTP is open just so you can access the device for the first time. So, the vulnerabilities are sort of inherent. Scott, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I agree with that. Another thing is the vulnerabilities of these devices that are on networks is where they're on the network and how the network is configured. You may lock down something, but to have it work properly, you may have to have a port open that otherwise wouldn't be. So depending on where it sits on the network. So if it's on a private network, things are much easier to lock down and maintain security of the devices.
So you guys are both saying we need to work with our clients and the manufacturers and within the manufacturer's boundaries and set these things up appropriately for the network. But again, going back to it, they do all have vulnerabilities, and most of them maybe don't know about it.
Yeah,
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, having a device that even has a default password, you could call that a vulnerability if you don't change the default password. So part of it's the product, part of it's the processes, associated with the devices.
Okay. So as a follow-up question to that, can you tell me of one of the biggest vulnerabilities that the security providers have out there with these products?
We scan these devices. Like there's a lot of tools you can use to sort of scan them. Once they're live, once they're actively on a network. And the biggest thing that I find are open service ports, which are standard service ports, which are even simpler to attack. Scott alluded to the dynamic service ports, which open much higher up to allow things to occur. But small, simple scanners will reveal that, like FTP, file transfer protocol, for example, maybe run on port 21 or 22 is open, or Telnet's open. And these are oftentimes the manufacturers use those so that they can kind of get back into the device to do something to it, maybe download firmware dynamically or something. But that's a real vulnerability to leave it open. And, if they haven't given you a facility to close it, or if it can be forced open again by another methodology that the manufacturer's built in, then, that's a problem. And we see that quite often, that just these open ports by default open. So if someone doesn't go close them, that's going to be a problem. And that's the biggest thing that I see. Scott, what do you guys run into?
Yeah, we've actually, our clients have had their red teams or IT teams and cyber teams scan are actually scanning our devices that are typically on a private network within their corporate network, and they're finding all these ports are by default open. And honestly, it's a convenience to have these open for us that do a lot of remote support. But at the same time, it has not been a practice for us to go in and truly lock down all these ports on panels and devices that we deploy on the network. So it's a practice we've implemented, of course, but it's something very new. And we're just starting to see the physical security devices within a client's network being scanned just like the rest of the stuff that they scan across our business networks.
So do you suggest removing or shutting down some of these protocols and ports? And the big problem is, how do you know that they're open? How do you know that they're vulnerable?
Well, yes. As far as we're concerned, we were initially alerted by our clients that the IT department found these vulnerabilities from their perspective and whatever their compliance requirements are, and alerted the security group, the physical security group, which then alerted us in somewhat of a panic to take care of those things. So we're taking care of that initially before these devices are deployed, but there's a lot of devices out there that are sitting there in default mode with regards to how they're configured, and a lot means a bunch of work to go back and remedy those devices and secure them.
Okay.
Yeah, and in the older ones, we found, a lot of the scans, so we scan, the scan can reveal for you sort of the level of encryption that's associated with perhaps HTTPS, which is hopefully what they've been switched to. So when you first connect to these devices, in order to reach the configuration page, you typically are doing that via HTTP on a Chrome browser or an Internet Explorer browser. Once that's done, you really want to default that to HTTPS and turn on the encrypted way to connect to it, so that you're not passing login and password information in the clear, right? So it could be intercepted. And we're finding, so once you do that, you say, wow, I've really got my device in a much better state, which is true. The further problem that we found in our scanning is that the level of HTTPS has used to be called SSL, secure socket layer, was the way that we handled the passing of keys and credentials. And of course, SSL's been broken now for a few years. It was hacked, and there are a variety of off-the-shelf tools you can use to exploit that vulnerability in devices that say only use SSL. So they got rid of SSL, and they use what's called transport layer security. And so you can see this when you scan these devices. If they'll try, the latest version is TLS 1.2, and so your device will try to connect with that level of assurance. And if it fails that, it'll try 1.1, then it'll try 1.0. And failing all that, it'll still go back and try SSL if your browser allows it. And we find a lot of devices today out there still they deprecate automatically to SSL 3, and they're not even supporting any of the transport layer stuff. So very simple exploits available for devices that are sitting there out on the network just due to lack of encryption or even improper implementation of higher levels of security.
Andrew, I'd like to bring you back to default passwords you mentioned a little while ago. We all know that many of the integrators leave the default passwords in devices, and those default passwords are easy to find on the internet, which kind of compromises the entire network, and we've seen evidence of that recently with some of the news media that's come out. One of the things that we can do very easily is change those passwords and protect our clients. But some of us have networks that have 1,000 or more devices on there. What do you use to manage your passwords on the network?
Yeah, we use Passportal, and I mean, there's a few good ones out there. Keep Keep, LastPass, a few of them come to mind. I think I would send people to like Gartner, look up like the Magic Quadrant, and play with some of these tools. They're all a hassle. No one's built in the time to use those management tools, right? And that's sort of the issue. And so for our guys, it's another step in this process that they have to go through. And it's even managing, you want to change that admin password for that device, right? But then you really want to go in and add a user and let that user be the stream that like sends video to the VMS, for example, and not even do that from the administrative logon. Typically, you have to tell the VMS the logon credentials to use to like pull video off of a camera, for example. So, further, you really got a couple passwords in each device that you really need to manage. And it's quite cumbersome. And, if people aren't used to it, that's why excuse me, I think it's why it wasn't done. I walked the site yesterday, 2 different alarm manufacturers that had in 2 different areas, and walked right up to both of these different systems, and I happened to know the master programming code, the default one, and tried it on both of them, and it worked. So that's an example. It's not just camera systems, but it's, a lot of stuff out there, I think, gets deployed with these defaults because it's easier for the integrator to manage it, right? Because the default's easy to know, right? So whatever guy shows up, he can get the work done. So I don't know. It's a problem that's sort of rampant out there in the industry, I think.
Well, it's tough to keep track of all those passwords. You got passwords everywhere.
Yeah. Well,
depending on the manufacturer and the level of password you can use, it just complicates the matter also.
Yeah, definitely. And it's about bidding it in, and we have to have that discussion with the customer because our bids for maintenance, our bids for deployment come back so much higher if we're adding this layer of assurance. Just password management alone is going to take some extra number of minutes per device. And you talk about 1,000 devices. There's a couple thousand minutes, right? So there's, how many hours is that? My brain's not working on that math just yet, but.
Too early in the morning for you.
And even going forward.
It's early in Honolulu.
Initially, that's a management issue, and you need a place to manage those passwords, whether you create them or the client provides them. Even a bigger issue is moving forward. How do you manage or maintain security on these devices well beyond the warranty period or within the warranty period? Setting a secure password on a device for deployment is one thing, but several things can happen to those devices depending on what they are. Even a power reset could pull that back to a default setting. So I think that from our perspective, it's got to be more of a long-term management plan and on top of the initial hardening of these devices on deployment. So, and that is a challenge. It's a different service, new service, and it's a cost that our clients aren't accustomed to paying for.
And that's a big one.
Great.
I mean, it's going to cost us a lot more. How do we make sure that we pass that on?
And how do we explain it?
It's our problem.
Yeah, how do we explain it? How do we explain the existing platform they have deployed that's been deployed for years? Are they, that's an interesting dilemma, if you will. Let's say a client deploys 100 more cameras or network devices of sort that can be hardened because cyber is such a big thing now. What about everything else that is deployed that most likely has not been hardened? Is that a liability on the client to pay for that? Or would they expect that to already have been hardened if there were devices that could be hardened? So it's an interesting conversation. And Andrew, exactly what's the communication to the client that encompasses everything?
If the client doesn't have the tools to scan and monitor that, do you have recommendations for tools for some of the smaller integrators? Because we're all not huge integrators with great budgets, so we can absorb those kinds of things.
No, it's a problem, and I have this idea that really we where we can, we need to take these guys in this older gear and just firewall it. We really need to put that behind a firewall and then allow VPN access to it for services. And that's something that we can monitor regardless of the sort of lack of cyber hygiene in the gear itself, because we know this older equipment has weaker chipsets and it's hard to secure, or it really just can't be secured. So, and then in the newer stuff, the bigger guys, obviously, you probably, your enterprise clients, I'm sure, have SolarWinds and Microsoft System Center and all these large tools that will monitor. They can actually monitor, like they can open SNMP simple network management protocol, and monitor the MIBs, which are the machine information base of these devices. And that's going to sort of give you this nominal operating environment that it can look at. And so if it sees things non-nominal, you can set alerts on that, right? So in the enterprise space, they really have these tools for monitoring servers, which all these devices, camera, whatever it may be, these are all servers. They've got an embedded Linux server, which is why they're so powerful if you can hack them and get a hold of them. Beyond that, there are some tools. One, I think it's called Vunetrix, that you can like put a monitoring agent onto a network, and that node that sits there is actually designed to talk to MIBs on those types of devices, specifically on physical security types of devices. And, you know, giving up something like that, right? Say a customer just can't afford that cost of even some type of monitoring and like that. We have that we take these scans that we've been talking about, right? And when we baseline a system in our shop before it gets deployed, you know, we're able to take a snapshot of all the devices, and we know that we've closed all the ports. We know the level of TLS, so we kind of know everything that's there. Then we go deploy it, and then we can run that scan again and make sure nothing changed. And then we can come back and run that periodically as part of their maintenance, be it monthly or quarterly, you know, so we can make sure that, as Scott said, no one's defaulted a device or no administrator's gone in and opened up FTP to do something and left it open. So it gives you at least some way to kind of make sure that the installed system matches the same level of cyber hygiene that you installed it with. And, you know, if you've got vulnerabilities, at least you'll be able to talk to the customer about those and perhaps, you know, firewall them off of their WAN or been able to provide VPN access to the devices if they need to access some service from that system over the WAN. So there's ways to do things securely if you know about the vulnerabilities. That's the other good thing about learning what they are.
So let's talk about the liability of this first off. You know, we're not talking about people getting access into the security system. We're talking about people using the security system to get access to their entire network and get, you know, secure information that's part of the client's network. And that's really what we're trying to provide security for in the long run. And again, by leaving our devices open, we leave the door open for their network. So what you guys are saying is really make this, lock it down, get it off of their main network, get it firewalled away, close all the ports, get everything out of the way so people can't get to it. So they can't use it as a door to get into the rest of the network.
So they can't use the system at all. That's the perfect. Then we definitely know it's locked down.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a fact.
And there's definitely a balancing act. There's a balancing act between making it usable and making it secure.
Yeah, and
that's really the message.
Too.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think the enterprise customers are the ones that, you know, they really are trying to have a rich environment. They're trying to utilize their environment, and, you know, they're not. They deployed this system to provide a service to them, right? They're gathering data from the security infrastructure or whatever, and so they need these services open, and they actually need them ported into the WAN somehow, right? So it's good that they have tools and ways of monitoring that traffic and making sure that the type of traffic, you know, maybe it's a frames of H.263 or whatever video, they can actually know that stuff. It's the smaller guys that are a vector into the bigger guys, right? So if you attack the small guy who doesn't have all that stuff going on, and he's sitting there with the cameras, you know, on his you know, small network. He's probably got one switch inside of his organization, and the cameras are on the same network as the counting machine or whatever. You know, and once you get inside of him, maybe you can infect the service laptops that his techs use when they go out in the field, things like that. So, you know, no one's going to announce their presence once they've infected your network. That's a asset for a hacker, right? He's going to keep that until he needs to use it, or he can auction that off to someone to use it. So there's it's not like they get in and say, "Oh, we're here, hi, hello," you know.
So another question we have is about the firmware updates, and in our industry, we don't really apply firmware very well, and we all know that a lot of these vulnerabilities are found in the firmware on the devices, which is local software that these little devices run. And as an industry, we really don't apply firmware patches very well. You know, we go out there and we do the install, and we walk away a lot of times and leaving them at their base firmware. We all know that, you know, the PCs that we deploy, the servers we deploy, well, they need the Microsoft updates. They need the Linux updates. They need all these updates all the time to close those holes and vulnerabilities. So it's a big problem in our industry, but it's also a big cost. You know, we get these firmware updates from our manufacturers. Some of them don't even work with the different video manufacturers. So let's talk about cameras. You know, the cameras come out, they throw out a new firmware. Well, that doesn't work with the camera manufacturer that we have it deployed on. It hasn't been tested yet. It's not ready to go. They even cause other problems on the system that we don't know about. So how do you manage all this firmware out there? You know, like Rex said, there's some sites that have over 1,000 devices. Not only does the password have to be managed, but the firmware has to be managed on all these things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you know, Robert,
Scott, take that one.
Go ahead, Andrew. Okay, real quick. Yeah, I was just going to mention, that's a challenge. Always has been, Robert. You pretty much nailed it in terms of the history within our industry as to how well we've kept up on firmware updates. And as a matter of fact, the manufacturers posting these firmware updates, sometimes that is not as straightforward as it could be. Maybe it goes to the sales staff within an organization and never makes it to the operations side of the house to do something with it. The long and short of it is you have to put a program around it, especially now, and that can be all inclusive with regards to what we're talking about, continued cyber hygiene, performance management type programs to allow the client to be aware of firmware updates that have strong security impacts. As a matter of fact, you may have different firmware versions across many devices in a client's deployment, and that makes things very challenging to standardize on a cyber hygiene program for them. So you have to be proactive, I think, with the manufacturers and ensure that there's a line of communication and a method to get those firmware updates and the notifications from them. But at the same time, you have to have an agreement or some type of an understanding with the client where they may have to pay ad hoc or in some type of a performance management program to keep all their devices and firmware updated. Because the minute one firmware update that isn't made, let's say you deploy a bunch of devices that all has the latest firmware because you run it through the bench and get it all squared away before you take it to the field, that may be secure, but the other half of their platform and devices out there are the whole. So it's a problem, and I think both manufacturers and integrators have to come together individually and collectively with programs that will serve their clients.
Sounds like it's a client education piece as well. I mean, a lot of it our clients aren't even aware of. You know, it's a big cost piece, like I mentioned before as well, that, you know, updating the firmware, say once, twice, 3 times, 4 times a year on a lot of these devices is costly. You know, somebody's going to end up paying for it. Right now, the clients are going to expect that we're going to secure their systems and keep them safe. And in a lot of aspects, we have a 1-year warranty clause that we're supposed to be doing that. So we need to add that into it and understand that that's part of the package. You know, there's big education.
Yeah, and especially if they don't have a policy. You know, most of your enterprises and even a lot of your medium-sized, medium-sized businesses, excuse me, will have a policy, an update policy. And what we really want to do is be a part of that because they've already recognized it's important to their organization. And so, you know, what they're not used to is absorbing the cost for us to do it because we have oftentimes so many extra devices that have to be done. So it's great when they acknowledge that they need this level of assurance, and usually that's flowed down from some sort of a risk assessment that they've done, and you know, based on the, you know, I may have got some small like medical R&D guys out here who have, you know, very small spaces but very high risk for their intellectual property. So their policies are very strict, comparatively speaking, probably like a larger enterprise may be. Whereas I have other small, you know, maybe an HVAC provider who may work for DOD or hospitals or whatever, who has no policy whatsoever. He's never even considered this type of stuff for his gear. So oftentimes that education process can be quite a wake-up call from an expense perspective, you know, for helping someone manage their you know, at this point it's sort of talking about their IT infrastructure, but, you know, even the physical security equipment as a component of their IT infrastructure.
So you know, like we talked about before, we have thousands of devices out there on some of these sites. And I don't believe that we have a product that can effectively manage all of those password or all of those firmware updates and understand what firmware level they're on, other than, let's say, some of the manufacturer's software. But we don't have a collective place to do that. Do you know of a software package that's out there that would help us to manage this problem?
I've only seen that being done manually. Like everybody seems to keep records in their spreadsheets. On the video side, more and more of the VMSs, especially some of the recent versions of Milestone, or I don't know if we can talk about manufacturers, but a lot of these VMSs will report the endpoint device firmware status, right? You can read it off of there. So in the access control world, the same thing. You can see what version of firmware is out there. And so that reporting mechanism oftentimes isn't quite granular enough to pull that report for you. But minimally, you can easily bring it up on a screen, take a screenshot, and keep it on a spreadsheet or something. And, you know, that's probably a part of that periodic maintenance piece that needs to be done, whether it's a quarterly or a monthly, is pulling that firmware version back. You know, you started with it on the bench before you deployed, so you sort of knew the status. And then being able to read these vulnerability announcements when they come out. I know a lot of the manufacturers are starting to allow you to sign up for the equipment that you have of theirs, basically by part number, and they'll notify you of vulnerabilities, or also notify you of patches or updates. So, you know, and sometimes the vulnerabilities, as Scott said, aren't maybe critical to this particular organization, but sometimes they are. And then, you know, as you guys all talked about, applying that patch can break some of the integration, or cause certain services that you needed to not work. And so, you know, the testing of all this stuff in a beta environment is another expense that the customer perhaps is used to seeing. You know, the enterprise guys are, but below that, they're really not. And, you know, there's a lot of really large companies with a lot of devices that, you know, would not be classified as enterprise, you know, from my perspective.
Right. So, and going back to that problem, I still don't believe that a lot of the manufacturers out there are posting their firmware and posting their problems with their firmware and posting their vulnerabilities. It's kind of up to us to figure it out. We usually get a notification, hey, there's a new firmware. It just fixes some bugs that we had. It doesn't really say, hey, it fixed this vulnerability that allowed this to happen. And that's kind of letting all the hackers out there know how to get in. So
yeah, and that's a common practice. You know, there are a lot of these guys are hiring white hat hackers to try to break them and to make them aware of vulnerabilities that they find, and so they'll pay for that service. There are guys who find stuff broken or things that they can exploit, and they'll notify a manufacturer and say, hey, I'm giving you notice. If you don't fix this within a couple of weeks or a month, I'm going to announce it publicly. And that'll tend to motivate the manufacturer to try to develop a patch. But you know, this is not limited just to, you know, the physical security device world. It's an IT sort of you know, the way things are. And there's a lot of routers, there's a lot of switches, there's a lot of other IT infrastructure out there with issues that are constantly being worked on as well. For us, it's just not been part of our conversation, or a part of the conversation between us and our clients. You know, that this equipment has these vulnerabilities. These are all servers. You know, if you told them you're selling them 1,000 servers instead of 1,000 cameras, they'd be, wow, what's the maintenance package look like? You know, and they might be shocked.
Yeah, they would. But you know, we as an industry, we're still kind of on the access control and alarm side of the industry, and not really in the IT side. So that's going to come a little slower. And you're right, it's an education. We have to find a way of educating our clients, and I know that PSA Tech. Hopefully we're going to get the group together and I'll talk about that in the forum, going to get that out there on how we really talk to our clients about this. But just like the firmware on all the cameras, we do have the operating systems. A lot of us sell computers and servers and things like that, and we give them to the clients, and they expect them to be like a little black box that sits on their network. But those have to be updated just like the firmware. How do you suggest we handle that? How do we update all those computers? You know, it's the same thing as the cameras. And I don't think a lot of that's happening as well.
Well, you know, Robert, that's a great point. And I think Andrew might have mentioned a little bit earlier that servers are a bit more manageable with regards to pushing software updates and those types of things out to servers from a single point within the enterprise. But the fact is, and Robert, as you know, you're either going to use a client's image or you're going to provide a server with an OS image on there, configured the way the best by us, the best way we can that fits within their environment. Typically, when you deploy servers with your own OS and it's not imaged by the client, you own that server, and IT will acknowledge that's not theirs. So I think the rub there is if you can get your server imaged by the client's image, then they will be more likely to support it and pull it within their cyber hygiene programs and whatever they have going on. Otherwise, and what we've seen, I think we all agree, a bunch of NVRs out there deployed that have that don't have an image that was provided by the client. Typically, IT will not support those boxes. So it's a vulnerability both for our security clients, the groups within our clients' environments, but at the same time, it's a challenge for our security group, our client security groups, to bring IT in and embrace the support of their devices, unless they fall right in within their image compliance and their overall governance. So that is a challenge, and I think we'll probably see more and more server deployments imaged or with a client's image on it, or otherwise we'll have to have a more proactive method of maintaining the security on those servers through a performance management program or something along those lines.
So I know a lot of these machines that we deploy, if we're doing it correctly, are going to be on a kind of a contained network or a contained VLAN within, and they don't have access to the internet to be able to get those updates, or even to a SUS server to get the updates. So they're kind of locked away in their own corner. That makes it difficult to get the updates, as well as a lot of these manufacturers can't handle those updates. They have a patch list that a lot of the manufacturers put out there and say, hey, we can't do the latest patches. And I know that we've certainly had some systems that have been compromised because the latest updates have hit and it's taken out some of our servers. So that's a problem. I think the manufacturers are getting better, but it's still a major problem in our industry. I think, like I said, people are getting better, but wow, it's tough. Another thing we need to talk about PSA.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of these devices can't even withstand the scans that we run. Scans will just knock them off. I mean, just shut them down or reset them or break them. So that's a problem, right? So last thing I want to do is kind of run in and try to get a sense of the cyber assurance of a facility and kill all their cameras, right? It's like, wow, you can bring them back to life. It's just you didn't count on spending that week.
That was the vulnerability that was found by one of our clients. They hit the Linux vulnerability and it reset all the IPs to factory default and the password to factory default when it touched
device.
It. That's vulnerability. But that's a fun. Again, it's a cost to our industry.
Sure. Yeah, and these weaker chipsets will make their way out of the industry. I mean, the manufacturers are starting to, I think, they're starting to understand. We're seeing light. There's 5 or 6 now with hardening guys, so there's some light there. But it's several years away, I think, from providing us the type of equipment that we need with the better chipsets in it that we need, the level of encryption that we need to be able to meet the sort of compliance standards that are being pushed down by HIPAA and PCI and NERC-CIP and all these other compliance, which then they could put this stuff on the network because they could put it on there, they could encrypt it, they could monitor it, automate that monitoring, and then run reports against it, which is what's required. And till we have that type of gear, I don't know the real answer. If we stop buying stuff, maybe the manufacturers will move quicker, but then we'd all be out of business. So there is still the security aspect that we provide, the physical security that they gain. But the cyber security piece of this is an ever-growing concern. That's for sure.
Yeah, and the more that, we're seeing this even with our smaller clients, Anything that's cyber or not, card readers and cameras, they look to their IT group for support. So the more that IT becomes involved in our platforms that we deploy, the more that our platforms are going to have to maintain within their governance. And I think that our product suppliers have been a bit behind, I think, across IT in general, but with regards to staying up with the things like Robert mentioned, Windows updates coming in just crushing a system or scanning devices that just knocks them off completely. So I think it's this, it's on the manufacturer side to get more involved with today's technology and compliance, because sooner or later IT is going to really will be monitoring and managing the majority of the devices we deploy, where they're not so much now, they're kind of hidden, they're behind a firewall, and that's nice for IT because they don't have to worry about it, but now IT is going to have to worry about anything that's on the networks, because physical security groups aren't going to be the ones to own that risk, so to speak. So
the guy who really gets hit, gets hit is the project manager deploying this thing. He's got all this equipment he's got to put on somebody's network, and he's like, wow, now I had to become an IT expert and manage all this stuff in place. Now, most of the companies have a strong IT staff that can do this stuff, but boy, that's a lot to know.
Yeah, and the budgeting, the budgeting, I think that projects don't take into consideration of the client. The physical security group, they do that internal soft cost between each other, usually with IT, and the amount of work and the amount of involvement that IT is going to be required in terms of the cyber hardening and hygiene practices that our industry is embracing and starting to move forward with is going to be much more than what it used to be. So those costs and that consideration also has to be taken fairly seriously when we're planning a solution with our clients.
So I know Rex had a question about some of that cyber hardening. Rex?
I do, and that's one of the things you mentioned in the recommendations in your article, and it's a very big one because it gets us off on the right foot to start with. So when we're talking about cyber hardening, how do you cyber harden all these devices initially?
So you've got to, again, it starts with that scan, so that find out what you have first of all, right? So if there's no policy on the client side, right, that you're matched against, then I would say the best practice is to harden it as if it were your own, right? So could you live with it on your network, or could you live with it the way you're going to deploy it, understanding that client's level of risk to whatever level you can based on what he brings to you. So when we scan these devices, a lot of times, like the certificate expired in 2012, for example, even if it's SSL. So can you load another certificate on the device, right? So if we're not going to worry about device authentication, if we're not going to talk about that and talk about, say, the enterprise and deploying devices with TLS on their network and being able to, use the right level of encryption or the policy, they'll have a policy that says what they should be able to use. If we can do those things for them, great. But if we can't, personally, I think you're really left to firewalling this stuff off, and that's probably going to limit the services that the customer can get from the system without some type of a VPN access into it. And that to me is the very best thing I can do for them, because they're probably, if they have no IT policy in place regarding this stuff, they're very dangerous to themselves. So we need to just if we isolate this stuff as completely as possible, educate them about if they want to access a service, they want to see video on a mobile app, or they want to use a workstation on their WAN to perhaps print badges or something. So they're gonna be pulling some data from the system. Then we need to probably run a VPN so we can keep that pathway encrypted, and then make sure that workstation, if it's also running corporate applications like their Office environment, Office 365 or something, then they need to have some type of monitoring on that workstation. Something I would suggest beyond a little bit of just antivirus, maybe something a little more proactive that's got some machine learning in it or something like that, without getting into, if we don't want to talk about specific manufacturers.
Have you seen a safe standard out there that security providers can use, or are you aware of one that's in development?
For physical security providers specifically?
Yes.
No, you know, we're lacking an agent, right? So you can put agents, there's several of them. Just so, for example, Carbon Black. You can get, Carbon Black makes an agent for iOS and for Android and for Microsoft and for, actually for Linux. So you can get an agent like that that'll actually talk to your firewall and monitor these endpoint devices, right? And so it's looking for bad behavior out of that device. It's looking for malware. But we don't have an agent like that that's lightweight enough to run on these the physical security devices that we deploy. I haven't found one yet anyway. And that's primarily due to just the lack of power on the devices. You know, for the very same reason when we scan them, it breaks them, or we run a patch against them and it breaks them. They just lack the power to run some of these lightweight agents. And so I'm hoping soon someone will make something that we can deploy like that. That's what we're lacking currently from my perspective today, something that can talk to the firewall and talk to a Palo Alto, you know, threat fabric or a Fortinet threat fabric from behind the firewall, and then give us the alerts that we're looking for when a device is, you know, if you default it or reset it, or FTP gets opened, or it starts sending data other than video out of a camera, for example. You know, we need to be alerted about that, and we just don't have an agent like that yet.
Sounds like a great opportunity for you, Andrew. Start a business.
Do what?
Sounds like a great opportunity for you. Start a business.
I'm gonna start writing code today. Yeah. Well, I don't suggest anyone use any of the code I write.
You don't test it, do you? Hope not.
No, I just break stuff.
You know, that's a great point. I think we're limited today at the firewall, and there's some cloud service providers that will provide that 7/24 monitoring, some trending, pattern recognition, those types of things. But it doesn't really go beyond the firewall. So that would be interesting to see, Andrew, if somebody does come up with something like that. It'd be very powerful for us, that's for sure, in our industry.
Yeah, I've talked with these guys, and they're making, they're all pointed at endpoint devices, right? And they're looking at phones and workstations. I'm like, dude, there's like 10 billion IoT devices. Why don't you build something for that?
Yeah.
I think they've missed the boat.
So it sounds like it's a heck of a liability there. You know, for us as integrators, and you know, we're in the middle of this. We're in between the manufacturers and the clients, and we're the guys deploying it, and we have all the liability. So how do we get out of that?
Don't deploy it.
We're all going to go out of business, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
we're going to stop selling.
We have to have the discussion, so we have to have full disclosure, right? That starts with transparency. You know, from my perspective, we've got to have this discussion with the client, and then make them aware of the vulnerabilities that we're bringing. I think that's critical. We were just at the great conversation up there in Seattle. I talked about that. You know, this is something as an industry that we've got to bring to our clients' attention, because we don't want them bringing it to our attention because they found out or they got hacked, right? I just think that's bad for business. So let's go have this discussion. Let's talk about how to mitigate the risk. You know, the risk lives 24/7. It doesn't matter how hard something is. There's always someone working to reverse engineer it or find an exploit for it. You know, there's never a static, 100% position of cybersecurity. It's a dynamic situation that's always going to change. So there's always going to be liability, right? So, but we to the best of our extent, if we study the equipment, we understand what vulnerabilities are there, we put in mitigation steps, discuss those with the client. And if he doesn't want to pay for that, that's another problem, right? If he doesn't understand that expense or wants to put that off on us, well, then, I mean, that may not be the kind of client that we can handle from a liability perspective on our own behalf, right? And no one wants to get rid of clients. What we want to do is help them be as safe as they can possibly be from a cyber perspective with the equipment that we brought in. And, you know, we talked about, I think, some of the mitigation techniques that would make it very, very difficult for someone to leverage the physical security system. You know, if it's firewall off the LAN, you know, would make someone, you'd have to have something cross an air gap, right, where you've actually introduced a vulnerability that you convince a guy to download a video clip, and then he puts it on a USB drive and takes it to the corporate CEO, and the CEO plugs it into his workstation, and now he's taken that malware across the the air gap, for example. So you can reduce it to something like that, and then it's a matter of training people. Processes, and products are all part of the solution. So it isn't really just the technical controls that we've been talking about that are going to, make someone, just 100% safe. There's other ways to get to everyone.
Yeah, I think we need to start by training our own people. Sounds like
big time.
We're a piece of that liability there too.
Yes, definitely.
So Rex?
Well, the one thing I want to talk about also with that, because sometimes when you start talking about costs, similar to when we were talking about updates and firmware on devices, the client doesn't want to bear those costs. They don't want to include that, and they flat out refuse to participate in the process. How do you get around that?
Sure, liability waiver. They're going to have to sign for it, right? Today they've got to take that on. You remember how in the alarm monitoring industry you used to have clauses that said that the equipment would, we wouldn't guarantee that the equipment would perform as we'd even designed to do the things we designed it to do. There was verbiage in alarm monitoring contracts back in 20 years ago when I was involved with that industry. I don't know if they still use that or not, but that was their out.
They do.
Or if they, if they didn't receive a signal from the device, for example, right? Or if their automation didn't understand, Cisco 4.2 or whatever their COM protocol was. So, there's that level of discussion, and it really elevates the discussion. It's like, hey, we can assume this liability for you. We'll take this on and we'll work on it. And then we've got to, devise the mitigation scheme that we want to stand behind, for that client and his environment. And if he doesn't want to do that, I think he has to sign off and release us from that liability.
Yeah,
and why
absolutely.
Waiver?
I'm sorry.
And
You're
why,
talking about a waiver.
as an integrator, why would we need that waiver?
Because if not, we're liable. Yeah, sure. If it'll come down to so discovery is the expensive part of these lawsuits, right? So if you get named in the lawsuit, there's this forensic analysis of what happened. So somebody's going to have to prove that the malware got onto the camera you installed and then was introduced to the network through the switch and the VMS or whatever, however you hook to their network. But you're going to have to help supply all of that data, and that discovery is the real expensive part of the lawsuits, right? And cybersecurity is monitored by the FTC, so this is a federal. It's not like there's criminal law, right? There is for theft, but for cyber assurance, cyber liability, this has been in the realm of the FTC so far, and you see them threatening with fines. They threaten to fine people, and they have in some instances fined some people. But by and large, this is still in the big league world. It's all being defined. And even the cyber liability clauses and insurance policies that I read really don't talk to this level of control, technical controls that we've been talking about today. So for me, it's hard to understand where the liability is going to lie. I'd feel better having a client saying, okay, I understand there's vulnerabilities. They are introduced to me because of, I'm running cameras with SSL3 or whatever. These are known, and, have him sign off that he understands that liability and he's willing to accept it. And I think that's going to hold you up in court, but it may not release you from the discovery problem, right? You still may have to be part of that discovery, and there's an expense there for that.
Well, I'm more worried about losing clients over these issues, and not having business. That's a big deal. If we don't lock this stuff down and take care of it, they're just going to go somebody else.
That's right. And if they scan your existing stuff that you've deployed over the years, because now that's becoming a practice, typically at the enterprise level customers, but even smaller customers, they are now in trouble with their cyber team internally, and so they come directly to the integrator that installed it. So that's even a liability that's unforeseen until it possibly comes to fruition, where their cyber team does find these vulnerabilities, and the integrators don't have the decision to make whether to repair them or try to work something out with the client to where it's not at the full cost to the integrator. But there's that liability and the waiver of that liability. That's what you do now is communicate, be transparent with them, and let them know of the vulnerabilities of the equipment they may have deployed in the past, and what we're doing about it going forward with the equipment in terms of hardening and offering those hardening services where they can opt in or opt out of it. And to Andrew's point, liability waiver completely. So, okay.
Yeah,
You're talking about some of the older equipment. Go ahead, Andrew.
No, I like Scott's point. I mean, you may want to talk to your sales reps about including a firewall in their quote, right? Because that's going to bring this discussion. What do I need this firewall for, right? And so let's start to do. And you can get a fairly lightweight firewall to do this stuff. Sonic wall. I mean, something simple. These are several $100s, right? And then you can do some of that firewall monitoring, even that Scott talked about. So it's putting the parts in there that bring up the discussion, and then that's I think the entryway into the. You know, I'm not trying to sell them something. I'm trying to make them aware, and I'm happy to take on that liability as part of my maintenance program for them. But if not, I want them to understand if they don't want to pay for the firewall, they're going to have to assume that problem, for example.
And what do you do when they bring you the problem? They see these new gadgets on TV, or a salesman happens to get in the door and drop something new on their desk. How do you deal with the cybersecurity on those devices?
Yeah, again, so I want to scan it first. I typically ask them, well, what kind of scans have you done? You know, have you looked at it, right? That's sort of where my discussion starts. Now, my team, we've had a couple of different financial institutions that did some scans of their own that brought us some vulnerabilities. Fortunately, the VMS manufacturer had a non-published firmware that we were able to acquire and then install and mitigate that for them. So it's going to happen in both directions now. That's the environment we're living in. I want to be the guy that's bringing it first to their attention, but that's just not always going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Evaluation, and we do have that practice, and it's depending on if you can find a place to make that turn into revenue, that's a great thing. But anything that we're going to deploy goes through a rigorous test, both for functionality, but obviously for the hardening aspects of that particular device or platform. So having, like Andrew said, scanning, understanding the characteristics of those new cool things is very, very important, because it's really up to us to protect our clients from those shiny objects that could be very damaging to their overall security of their platforms.
And this is all new to us. I mean, a lot of this stuff is very new, where, you know, we didn't even think about cyber. We didn't even think about testing. We didn't even think about hardening. So I know a lot of the integrators out there in the same manner. You know, and it's stuff like we've been talking about in the project management committee that, wow, we have to get that out there to our guys. What do they know about it? You know, it's something they got to look for, because they're the ones installing it. There's a lot of liability out there that we got to get around. And when, as Rex said, they see that shiny new product on TV, or they read up on it in a magazine. I want this. Well, what kind of liability does that introduce on us if we just deploy it?
And do they understand the additional cost for preventing that?
Right.
Yeah, if it's preventable. I mean, a lot of these low-level, what I call consumer-grade devices, they've borrowed libraries of code, right? So they're not writing code on their own. They're just borrowing it and plugging stuff in, making stuff work with there's vulnerabilities already known about those pieces of code, and they're just wrapping it up in a bundle and calling it firmware. So those levels of assurance are you know, UL Underwriter Labs is working on that. I am working on that Series 2900 committee. But we're, you know, probably a few years away at minimum from having a standard written and published, and then probably another year or more from getting product that's been through that process and then available for sale. So, you know, we could be many years from having a product that's been subjected to the rigor, you know, from a firmware standpoint, as well as the hardware standpoint, that meets the levels that we really need, you know, for definitely for regulated industry, and then, you know, beyond that into all of the National Infrastructure Protection Plan. The NIPS sector has 16 different sectors and some subsectors, which include commercial buildings, right? So, you know, we've got a lot on our shoulders from a liability perspective for the next many years that we're going to have to shoulder, I think, additional responsibility and find a way to help the customers deal with the cost, or minimally deal with the cost of the mitigation, which, you know, maybe is cheaper for them, you know.
How do we get the manufacturers to step up and take on some of that risk and deal with some of these issues?
Well, I wouldn't want to be the whoa this week, I can tell you that. There's a few of them in the news making for the very wrong reasons, and it's super public, so I'm sure we can say that, right? There's these guys that have ignored this, are taking a beating for it. Now, I hope personally that continues. It's going to be a while before we have products with the levels of assurance that we need, and it's even going to be longer before the customers are willing to pay us to put it in to the level that it really should be installed at, right? That's what we're talking about. And maybe it's a 20% increase in installation and maintenance costs over the life cycle of a system. Maybe it's 30. I don't know, but they sure don't want to hear that because it's been getting cheaper and cheaper for years, right? So that's kind of what we're up against. And, working with manufacturers that are taking it on, and there are a few out there, and I'm sure you're aware of them, Rex. So, go down those paths with those folks first. I think we need to have that discussion with them, maybe at PSA Tech, about what kind of liability assurance are they willing to take on with us if we use their product, for example. Maybe we can include them in some of this cyber verbiage we're talking about in our contracts with our customers or something.
That's a great idea. I like that.
Yeah, having PSA as a vehicle to help push that strength in numbers is definitely something we can use.
Sure. I'm happy to be a part of that conversation.
I mean, this is a whole new realm. This is definitely a whole new realm for us. I mean, we've been following along, I'll say, security practice. Now we're being thrown into, well, we need to be following IT practice, not security practice, because security practice really isn't an IT practice.
Yeah, we ignored it for
completely
20 years.
Different.
Yeah, we all went with Windows, back, I kind of blame it on Windows 95 when all the business people went to Windows and we all got off of Linux, we all got dumb, and we could do everything we needed to do with a mouse. And I love it. I mean, it made us hyper-functional, right? It made the business world functional, but all of us went into the Windows world, and we forgot how powerful that little Linux kernel was as a server. We quit using that, and a lot of our industry folks aren't savvy at all. They just don't understand where to go, grep libraries from, and where you can get all of these things you can do with that little Linux kernel on that device out there. That's why it's such a powerful device to hack, because once you own one, you own a server on someone's network. And we've just forgotten all that. We've sold this stuff for years, and the industry's grown, 7-12% a year, some massive growth since the 70s, right? So we did that because we ignored all of this. And now it's time to add it to our cost, go out there and sell it, pass it on to the customers, make them aware, and start to do it the right way. I think there's going to be this consumer level of delivery for a long time. I don't really want to be a part of that. I want to be you guys know I've been on this soapbox for a couple of years now, ranting and raving about, oh my gosh, I didn't mean to be a part of the problem. And so I'm trying to become, that higher level of assurance offerer. And, it's just going to be painful getting there. That's all. We're all going to have to take that pain on. For us, it's the doing of it. For the customer, it's cost that they're just not associated with, and haven't been used to.
Yeah,
so we're
going to manufacturers. I'm sorry, go ahead, Rick.
We're going to be changing the industry. We have to. And I know that with PSA's help and all the manufacturers they support, I know we can change this. And Andrew,
it's going to be you guys.
Get on your soapbox, man. Keep it going.
I'm counting on you three guys. I want you three guys helping. I can't do this alone.
Gotcha.
We really need the customers to help us. It's the customers that need to help us. That's all.
Right.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, they're driving it. Scott?
Yeah, I was just going to mention the whole conversation around the manufacturers and where they're at with regards to their products and the ability to lock them down and secure them. A few years back, we realized that's going to be some time before they're as sophisticated as other things we may buy from an IT perspective. So we've taken upon ourselves to develop hardening guides where they don't exist. And it's actually become, Robert, you'd probably agree, a decision point when we're looking at maybe onboarding new products that we would get behind and resell and partner with. So where it never used to be at all, now it is actually a decision point that will determine whether or not we want to even take a look at a new product line or a new manufacturer. So it's I think earlier, I think Andrew was mentioning that hopefully This will push the manufacturers to be more, to move that needle quicker and get their devices to be much more secured with today's standards. But until that happens, it's on us to take care of that and have that knowledge base so that we can take care of our clients and we're not looking down the road a year later at a liability issue with our clients because we didn't do our homework or do the due diligence on these products we deploy. So.
Yeah, my heart goes out to Rex. You know, he's trying to cover the whole country, or at least the southern half of it, I think. You know, what a management, you know, headache you got in front of you, right, to get all your offices in step with all this type of policy, right? It's just going to be a lot of work.
Not only that, but all the different regulatory spaces we work in all have different standards because there's not one standard that everybody adheres to. Absolutely.
Sure.
And that's why we're looking from the management phase where we're going with this and what we're going to set up internally to handle it.
Yeah, a lot of work.
Tough.
Well, we're all here to. I think this type of discussion will help all of us. You know, we as we work on best practices and we share them through PSA with our partners. You know, we're as far as I can tell, we're kind of at the tip of the spear. You know, so to say. I don't like to use silly euphemisms, but the weight of that spear that drives, you know, that makes it so effective is behind it. That's in the partnership that we all have. So, you know, we just keep working on it. I think symposiums like this are a great way to get this discussion out there, and hopefully some of these tools that we're lacking, other people have developed or maybe can bring to our attention, and we can start testing those things out and make the management of this, you know, more bearable for our customer.
Yeah. Like we said, Andrew, I think you're going to have to develop them. You're the guy that knows it, so hey, start the new business.
Well, you can ask my wife. Waiting on me is like backing up.
So, in conclusion, because I think we're running a little long here, cyber's a big issue. I mean, it's a big, complex topic. We need to address it. I know it's not impossible to get accomplished, but you know, we have to have different committees working together. We have, I want to say, 5 different committees at PSA. We got to get them all working together, and I know that's the goal of having this all happen at PSA Tech and making sure that we can get this information out to all the rest of the committees so we can start addressing these issues and really come up with a lot better solutions that we can put into our clients that's going to bring more value from us to our clients. But really, we need to band together and work together with PSA and the manufacturers coming through PSA so we can solve this. Making sure that the manufacturers are going to start designing their products with cyber in mind. You know, as we hit this ITO, this Internet of Things that happens on all the products, I mean, we're looking at power supplies that have an IP address on them that are running a Linux kernel, as you said before, and now they're hackable, where we never used to have all these devices that are pathways into the systems. We need to work on all of those devices and understand what we're deploying. In this industry, there's little room for us to make a mistake. When we do make a mistake, it can end up putting us out of business. The threat of cyber attacks is out there. It's no longer acceptable to be ignorant and just say, that's not going to happen to me, because it sure can happen to all of us, and we need to be able to deal with it. So, Andrew, you have anything to add on that in conclusion?
Just 100% agree. You know, it's with the partnerships that we have through PSA, through our manufacturers, we're working towards a solution. It's going to be different based on the sort of the risk appetite of each client, but we minimally can mitigate the vulnerabilities that we have today, and hopefully in the future we'll have even better tools for monitoring those vulnerabilities that exist. And you know, we just have to keep working towards, and that's what I'm looking forward to doing.
Great. All right, thanks everybody for your participation in this meeting, and hopefully more to come. We got to get more of these meetings out there and really spread the word about cyber and get our project managers and our whole companies involved in it, as well as our clients.
All right, thanks everybody. Aloha.
Andrew, Scott, Robert, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this joint committee presentation on project managers' role in providing solutions that are cyber ready featuring PSA's Cybersecurity Committee and Project Management Committee. To experience more of the great content produced by PSA's committees, please visit our website. It's www.psasecurity.com. This will conclude today's presentation. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a great day.